The sky above New Anchorage was a patchwork of storm-gray clouds and the pulsating glow of alien ships. Their massive, jellyfish-like forms hovered silently, trailing bioluminescent tendrils that hummed with energy as they siphoned Earth's resources. The once bustling city was unrecognizable. Skyscrapers lay gutted, their twisted steel frames reaching like skeletal hands toward the heavens. The air reeked of scorched metal, acrid smoke, and the faint, nauseating tang of ozone from the alien extraction fields. Sergeant Callan Dray crouched behind a toppled monument, his breathing steady despite the chaos surrounding him. The staccato rhythm of distant gunfire echoed through the ruined streets, blending with the droning hum of Xa'Lorne patrol drones. His combat armor, streaked with soot and alien ichor, clung to him like a second skin, every scratch and burn a testament to how long he had survived when others hadn't. "Eyes on that patrol yet?" Callan's voice was low, steady, and edged with tension. "2 blocks east," came Lieutenant Eric Saul's reply over the comms. The younger man's voice crackled slightly, a reminder of their failing tech. 3 soldiers, 1 drone, same as the last squad. You're clear for the approach." Callan signaled to his team, a quick, sharp motion with his gloved hand. They moved as one, darting from shadow to shadow, their footsteps muffled against the cracked pavement. The streets were littered with the remnants of lives interrupted, overturned cars, scattered belongings, a child's stuffed toy half buried in the rubble. Each object felt like a ghost, a silent reminder of what had been lost. "Talia," Callan said softly into his comm. "Status on that EMP charge?" Dr. Talia Greaves' voice came through, calm but strained. "Still charging. Another 5 minutes, maybe less, if we don't fry the capacitor." "We don't have 5, Callan muttered. He could already hear the faint whir of the drone's propulsion system growing closer. "Do what you can." He motioned for Eric's to flank left, while Corporal Issa Vren took position to the right. Callan advanced down the center, his rifle pressed tight against his shoulder. The world seemed to narrow, every detail sharpening as adrenaline coursed through his veins. The faint hum of the drone became a dull roar in his ears, and the acrid taste of smoke coated his tongue. He could smell the alien soldiers now, a strange metallic tang that clung to the air like rust and blood. The first Xa'Lorne soldier appeared around the corner, its translucent, gel-like skin glowing faintly with shifting patterns of light. Its skeletal frame moved with an unsettling fluidity, its elongated limbs ending in sharp, clawed digits. It carried an organic-looking weapon fused to its arm, the barrel pulsating with a soft green glow. Callan froze, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Hold," he whispered. The word felt like a prayer. The second and third soldiers followed, their multifaceted eyes scanning the ruins with cold precision. The drone buzzed above them, casting an eerie, shifting light over the rubble. Callan waited until they were fully exposed, his heart hammering against his ribcage. "Now!" he barked. The street erupted in chaos. Issa fired the first shot, a perfectly aimed plasma bolt that struck the drone and sent it spiraling into a nearby building. The explosion lit up the night, casting long, jagged shadows across the ruins. Eric's took down the rear soldier with a controlled burst of fire, the alien's glowing patterns flickering violently before it collapsed. The lead Xa'Lorne pivoted toward Callan, its weapon charging with a high-pitched whine. Callan rolled to the side, feeling the searing heat of the energy blast as it scorched the air where he'd been. He came up firing, his shots tearing into the alien's chest. It staggered but didn't fall, its movements jerky and erratic. The final soldier lunged at him, its claws slashing through the air. Callan dropped his rifle and drew his combat knife in one fluid motion. The alien's acidic blood sizzled against the blade as he drove it into its side. The creature let out a guttural hiss, its bioluminescent patterns flashing in chaotic spirals. It retaliated, its teeth sinking into the exposed joint of Callan's armor. Pain shot through his arm, white-hot and blinding. Callan gritted his teeth and acted on instinct, grabbing the alien by its skeletal neck and biting down hard on its translucent flesh. The taste was vile, like copper and ammonia, but he didn't let go until the alien convulsed and collapsed. "Callan!" Eric's voice cut through the haze. "You good?" "I'm fine," Callan growled, though his arm throbbed with searing pain. He shoved the alien's body aside and retrieved his rifle, scanning the area for any remaining threats. The street was silent again, save for the distant crackle of flames. Talia's voice came through the comms. "EMP's ready. What's your status?" "Clear for now," Callan said. He glanced at the fallen Xa'Lorne soldier, its glowing patterns dimming with each passing second. "But something's wrong. These bastards aren't fighting like they used to. It's like they're weaker." "Maybe they're spreading themselves thin," Isa offered, her voice tinged with cautious hope. "Or maybe," Callan muttered, staring at the alien's lifeless body, "it's something else." The team regrouped in the shadow of a collapsed building, their breaths misting in the cold night air. Callan's arm throbbed, the alien's bite wound already beginning to swell. He ignored it, focusing instead on the strange stillness that had settled over the battlefield. "What now?" Eric's asked, his rifle resting against his shoulder. Callan glanced at the horizon where the faint glow of the alien extraction fields pulsed against the darkness. "We regroup, hit their next outpost, and figure out what the hell is going on." Talia's voice came through again, quieter this time. "Callan, whatever it is, be careful. Something's changing, and I don't think it's in our favor." Callan nodded, though she couldn't see him. He looked down at the alien corpse at his feet, its once brilliant glow reduced to a faint shimmer. The smell of its blood lingered in the air, sharp and metallic, like a warning. "Let's move," he said, his voice steady despite the unease coiling in his gut. As his team slipped into the shadows, the distant hum of the alien ships above seemed louder, more menacing. For the first time in months, Callan felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: uncertainty. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The narrow tunnels beneath the city carried an oppressive chill, the walls damp with condensation that reflected the faint, flickering glow of the Resistance's makeshift lighting. The air was stale, heavy with the mingling scents of oil, sweat, and the metallic tang of scorched alien tech. Callan Dray led his team deeper into the labyrinth, his footsteps echoing faintly in the silence. The weight of his pack pressed against his shoulders, but the throbbing in his bitten arm was harder to ignore. "How much farther, Talia?" Callan's voice broke the stillness, sharp but not impatient. "2 more junctions," Dr. Talia Greve replied from up ahead. She walked briskly, a compact scanner clutched in one hand, its soft beeps punctuating her steps. The scanner's glow illuminated her face, drawing harsh shadows across her features. "The lab should be intact, assuming the aliens haven't found it yet." "Assumptions get people killed," Eric's muttered, his rifle resting against his shoulder as his sharp eyes swept the passageways. "And without the lab, so do we," Talia snapped back, her tone clipped. She didn't slow her pace. "Unless you've figured out how to reverse engineer their tech in a sewer, Lieutenant, this is all we've got." Callan suppressed a smirk despite the tension tightening his chest. Eric's usual stoicism was no match for Talia's relentless practicality, and he appreciated the occasional spark of humanity in the otherwise grim routine of survival. The tunnels opened into a cavernous chamber, dimly lit by dying emergency lights mounted on rusting walls. The lab was a patchwork of salvaged equipment, monitor banks powered by jury-rigged generators, tables cluttered with tools, and crates of scavenged materials. The faint hum of the machines was a welcome sound, a fragile oasis in the chaos above. "Home sweet home," Isa said, her voice tinged with sarcasm as she lowered her weapon, if home was a rat-infested basement. "It's functional," Talia retorted, already making her way to a central console. She powered it on with a flick of her wrist, the screen flickering to life with a low hum. "Let's see if we can make it more than that." Callan dropped his pack onto the nearest table and leaned against it, rolling up his sleeve to examine his arm. The puncture wounds from the alien's teeth were red and swollen, the skin around them hot to the touch. He grimaced, the memory of the encounter flashing in his mind. The alien's sharp teeth, its convulsing body as it fell. "You should let Talia check that," Eric said, nodding toward Callan's arm as he began securing the entrance. "Doesn't look great." "It's fine," Callan replied tersely, though he wasn't convinced himself. The throbbing hadn't subsided, and an uncomfortable heat radiated from the wound. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the faint vibrations beneath his boots, the constant reminder of alien extraction fields above. "Talia, what's our play?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to cut through the tension. Talia didn't look up from the console. "I need samples, data, anything we can pull from the alien tech or remains. If we're lucky, we might figure out how to disrupt their systems." "Lucky isn't a strategy," Callan said. "Neither is dying without a fight," Talia shot back. She gestured toward a cold storage unit along the wall. "Help me with the samples we brought from the last raid. The sooner I can start, the sooner we'll know if we have a chance." Callan crossed the room and unlatched the unit, a hiss of chilled air escaping as the door swung open. Inside were fragments of alien weaponry, shards of their armor, and a translucent vial containing a sample of blood from the soldier he'd bitten. The sight of it sent a shiver down his spine, the memory of its metallic taste lingering like a ghost in his senses. He placed the vial on the table, watching as Talia donned a pair of gloves and began working with precise, practiced movements. The liquid shimmered faintly under the light, its unnatural hue a reminder of how little they understood their enemy. "Something's off," Talia murmured, frowning as she studied the sample. She adjusted the scanner's settings, her brow furrowing deeper with each passing moment. "What do you mean?" Callan asked, stepping closer. "Look at this," she said, turning the screen toward him. The display showed the alien cells breaking down, their structure collapsing at an accelerated rate. This shouldn't be happening, not under these conditions. Callan's stomach tightened. "What's causing it?" "I don't know yet," Talia admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "But if this is happening across their forces, it could explain why they've been faltering." Issa leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So what? They're dying on their own? Saves us the trouble." "Nothing dies on its own without a reason," Talia countered. She turned to Callan, her expression unreadable. "That bite, the one you mentioned, did you notice anything strange after?" "Other than it being alive enough to bite me," Callan said dryly. He gestured to his arm. "This doesn't exactly feel great, if that's what you're asking." Talia's gaze narrowed. "We might need a sample from you, too." "Not happening," Callan said immediately. "Callan," she said, her tone softening, "if there's a connection, we need to know. This could be the key to understanding what's happening to them." Callan hesitated, his instincts warring with reason. He glanced at Eric's, who gave a slight shrug. "Your call, boss." With a resigned sigh, Callan extended his arm. "Make it quick." Talia worked silently, drawing a small sample of blood and comparing it to the aliens. As the data streamed across the screen, her expression shifted from concentration to something closer to disbelief. "This can't be right," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What?" Callan demanded. "What is it?" "The bacteria in your saliva," Talia said, her eyes locked on the screen. "It's devastating to their cells. Their biology has no defense against it." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a shroud. Callan stared at her, his mind racing to process the implications. "You're saying my bite killed that thing?" he asked, his voice low. "Not just that one," Talia said, her voice trembling slightly. "If this spreads, it could collapse their entire invasion force." Callan exchanged a glance with Eric's, who looked equally stunned. The realization hit him like a blow. What had started as an act of desperation had become something far more dangerous. "We need to keep this contained," Callan said finally, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "If they find out, they'll retaliate," Talia finished. Her hands trembled as she removed her gloves. "And they won't stop until we're wiped out." Callan nodded, the gravity of the situation sinking in. He clenched his fists, the pain in his arm a distant echo now. "Then we don't give them the chance," he said, his voice hardening. "We fight back, and this time we end it." The tension in the room was palpable as the team exchanged determined glances. Callan knew the road ahead would be brutal, but for the first time in months he felt a glimmer of hope and the weight of a responsibility far greater than he'd ever imagined. The storm over New Anchorage had grown restless, clouds churning with electric ferocity as lightning streaked across the night sky. From the safety of the underground tunnels, Callan Dray peered through a narrow fissure in the surface, his sharp eyes scanning the alien-controlled skyline. The Xa'Lorne jellyfish-like ships hung ominously above the city, their glowing tendrils dimming in uneven pulses. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the eerie stillness of the air and see it in the erratic movements of the patrol drones that once glided with perfect precision. "Sir, you're going to want to hear this," Eric Soule called from deeper in the tunnel. His tone was tense, laced with the urgency that made Callan move instinctively. The underground lab hummed faintly as Talia Grieve worked furiously at her console, her fingers dancing across the keys with practiced efficiency. Callan entered the dimly lit space, his boots crunching softly against the gravel-strewn floor. The sour smell of sweat, oil, and lingering fear filled the air, mingling with the cold sterility of Talia's equipment. "What's the situation?" Callan asked, his voice steady despite the growing sense of unease. Talia didn't look up from her screen. "You were right. Something's happening to them." She tapped a few commands, and the console projected a live feed onto the wall. It showed a Xa'Lorne extraction site, what should have been a meticulously controlled operation. Instead, chaos reigned. Soldiers staggered like marionettes with their strings cut, their glowing patterns flickering erratically. Drones hovered aimlessly, colliding with each other before crashing to the ground in bursts of sparks. In the background, one of the massive jellyfish-like ships listed to one side, its tendrils curling inward as though in agony. "What the hell is going on?" Eric muttered, his gaze glued to the screen. Callan watched in silence, his gut tightening. The grotesque beauty of the Xa'Lorne's collapse was almost hypnotic, but there was no mistaking the horror beneath it. The precision and order that had made them so terrifying was unraveling, their once formidable presence reduced to shambles. "It's spreading," Talia said, her voice barely above a whisper. She gestured to another screen displaying cellular data. The alien cells were breaking down at an exponential rate, the bacteria ravaging their systems like wildfire. "This isn't isolated anymore. Whatever started with that bite is now tearing through their entire infrastructure." Callan clenched his jaw, his mind racing. "What's their response?" "Panic," Talia replied. "The patrol patterns have become erratic, and their ships are falling back to defensive positions. But if they figure out what's causing this, they'll try to stop it," Callan finished grimly. He turned to Eric. "Get the team ready. We need to hit them hard before they can regroup." Eric gave a curt nod and disappeared into the tunnels, leaving Callan alone with Talia. The soft glow of the monitors cast shadows across her face, making her look more worn than ever. He could see the weight of her discovery pressing down on her, a mixture of triumph and dread etched into her features. "We didn't mean for this to happen," Talia said, breaking the silence. Her hands gripped the edge of the console as though anchoring herself. "This wasn't the plan." "There wasn't a plan," Callan said bluntly. "We were out of options. You said it yourself. This is our chance." "At what cost?" Talia snapped, her voice cracking. She gestured to the screen, where another Xa'Lorne soldier crumpled to the ground, its bioluminescent patterns dimming until only darkness remained. "Do you see what we've done? We've unleashed something we can't control. And if the galaxy finds out, they'll fear us," Callan interrupted, his tone colder than he intended. "And maybe that's exactly what we need." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Talia's gaze locked onto his, her expression a mix of defiance and resignation. Callan didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to, not when the stakes were this high. "We'll deal with the consequences later," he said finally, his voice softening. "Right now, we have to survive." Before Talia could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. The monitors flickered, and a low, guttural hum resonated through the tunnels. Callan grabbed his rifle, his instincts kicking in. "They're targeting the extraction sites," Talia said, her voice rising with alarm. "If they purge those fields, they might be able to stop the spread." "Then we make sure they can't," Callan said, already moving toward the exit. "Stay here and keep monitoring. I'll radio when we've secured the site." Outside, the night was alive with chaos. The alien ships glowed faintly in the stormy sky, their tendrils retracting as they concentrated their efforts on the extraction zones. Callan's team moved swiftly through the rubble-strewn streets, their silhouettes blending with the shadows. "Targets up ahead," Eric said, his voice low. He pointed to a cluster of alien machinery near the extraction field, its tendrils pulsating with eerie light. "Looks like they've set up a containment grid." Callan studied the setup, his sharp eyes assessing every detail. The grid was surrounded by Xa'Lorne soldiers, their movements erratic but still dangerous. The faint smell of their metallic blood hung in the air, carried on the biting wind. "We take out the grid, the whole field goes critical," Callan said, his voice steady. "Issa, cover our approach. Eric's, you're with me." The team moved with practiced precision, their boots crunching softly against the debris. The sound of alien machinery filled the air, a rhythmic, almost organic hum that set Callan's teeth on edge. The closer they got, the stronger the smell became, metallic and acrid like rusted iron scorched by flame. "Ready?" Callan whispered. Eric's nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. Issa signaled from her perch, her weapon trained on the nearest soldier. Callan inhaled deeply, steadying himself before giving the signal. The first shot rang out, piercing the night like a lightning strike. Issa's aim was true, and the alien crumpled before it could react. Callan and Eric's moved in, their rifles spitting plasma bolts that lit up the darkness. The Xa'Lorne fought back with desperate ferocity, their weapons crackling with green energy that seared the air. Callan's heart pounded as he engaged the nearest soldier, his movements fluid and deliberate. The alien's claws slashed through the air, narrowly missing his face as he ducked and fired point-blank into its chest. The acrid stench of burning flesh filled his nostrils, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. "Grid's exposed," Eric shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Callan turned to see the containment grid flickering, its energy field destabilizing. The alien machinery hissed and sparked, emitting a high-pitched whine that made his ears ache. He sprinted toward it, his boots pounding against the ground. "Cover me!" he shouted. Issa and Eric's opened fire, their shots keeping the remaining Xa'Lorne at bay as Callan reached the grid. The heat radiating from the machinery was intense, searing his skin even through his armor. He planted the explosive charge with practiced precision, his hands steady despite the chaos around him. "Get clear!" he yelled, diving behind a crumbling wall just as the charge detonated. The explosion was deafening, a burst of light and sound that seemed to shake the very earth. Callan shielded his face as debris rained down, the acrid smell of burning machinery mingling with the faint metallic tang of alien blood. When the dust settled, the extraction field was silent, its tendrils lying limp and lifeless. "Target neutralized," Issa reported, her voice calm despite the chaos. Callan nodded, his chest heaving as he rose to his feet. The Xa'Lorne forces were in full retreat, their once formidable presence reduced to scattered remnants. But even as he watched them fall back, a gnawing unease settled in his gut. This wasn't over, not yet. Callan Dray stood atop a crumbled overpass overlooking the shattered remnants of New Anchorage. The alien tendrils, once glowing like bioluminescent veins, now hung limp and lifeless over extraction fields rendered useless. The air was thick with smoke and ozone, the distant sound of crackling flames underscored by the faint hum of retreating Xa'Lorne drones. A heavy silence lingered, broken only by the occasional rumble of collapsing structures. It was victory, but it didn't feel like one. "Report," Callan barked into his comm, his voice clipped. "The grid's down, sir," Issa said from her sniper perch. "Last of their patrols are scattering, but they're moving weird, disorganized, like they're drunk." "They're not drunk," Talia's voice came through, sharp and exasperated. "The infection is progressing. The bacterial disruption is destabilizing their motor functions." "And yet they're still trying to blow us to hell," Eric's cut in. "Doesn't feel like a win." "It's not over yet," Callan said, gripping his rifle tightly as he surveyed the horizon. The Xa'Lorne ships in the sky appeared fractured, their once fluid movements jerking with unnatural spasms. "We've won a battle, not the war." Callan climbed down from the overpass, the cold steel of the ladder biting into his palms, as he descended to the team's makeshift base beneath the ruins. The damp, narrow space smelled of mildew and burnt circuitry, a stark contrast to the alien scent that still clung to his senses. Inside, Talia sat hunched over her console, the faint glow of the monitor casting sharp shadows across her face. "You look worse than the last corpse I shot," Callan said, dropping his pack onto the ground. Talia didn't look up. "Maybe that's because I've been running analysis for the last 12 hours while you've been out playing hero." "Find anything useful?" he asked, ignoring the jab. Talia gestured to the screen. "Plenty. The bacteria's spreading faster than anticipated. Whatever defense mechanisms their biology has are failing. If we maintain pressure, we could wipe out their forces completely." "Sounds promising," Issa said, sliding into the room with her rifle slung across her back. "Why don't you look happier?" "Because if they figure out the source, they'll target us directly," Talia snapped, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't just a biological weapon, Callan. It's a galactic death sentence. If word gets out, every species out there will see us as a threat." Callan leaned against the wall, his jaw tightening. He'd already considered the possibility. Humanity's accidental biological edge wasn't just a weapon, it was a curse. But there was no time for hesitation. The Xa'Lorne were faltering, and if they didn't press the advantage now, the opportunity would slip through their fingers. "So what's the move?" Eric's asked, entering the room and crossing his arms. "You've been quiet since we hit the extraction site." Callan straightened, his voice firm. "We hit them where it hurts the most, their fleet. Without their ships, they lose their mobility, their firepower, their chance to retreat. But we can't take them head on." Talia turned to him, her expression skeptical. "And how exactly do you propose we do that? Their fleet is still operational, even if it's compromised." "We make them destroy themselves," Callan said, his tone sharp with conviction. "Talia, can we isolate the bacteria's signal? Something we can amplify, broadcast directly to their ships?" Talia blinked, the idea clearly catching her off guard. "Theoretically, yes. The bacteria disrupt their neural networks. If we mimic that signal, we could induce a similar breakdown without direct contact. But the range doesn't matter," Callan cut in. "We don't need to infect all their ships, just enough to start a chain reaction. Once their systems destabilize, the fleet will turn on itself." "That's a big if," Eric said, frowning. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we're dead anyway," Callan replied bluntly. He turned back to Talia. "How long would it take to rig something like that?" Talia exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "With what we've got? Maybe a day if everything goes right." "It never does," Issa muttered, earning a faint smirk from Callan. "We don't have a day," Callan said. "Talia, prioritize what you need. Eric's Issa, you're with me. We'll scavenge the parts and buy you the time." The team dispersed, their movements deliberate and focused. Callan grabbed his rifle and headed for the surface, the cold wind stinging his face as he emerged into the night. The city was eerily quiet, the absence of gunfire and explosions unsettling. He could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him, every decision balancing on the edge of survival and annihilation. The scavenging mission was a blur of tense movements and whispered commands. They picked through the ruins of alien machinery, the faint smell of burnt wiring mingling with the metallic tang of blood still lingering in the air. The silence was broken only by the occasional distant drone of Xa'Lorne patrols, their erratic patterns a stark contrast to the precision they once wielded. "This enough?" Issa asked, holding up a bundle of alien circuitry, its glowing veins still pulsing faintly. "It'll have to be," Callan said, his voice low. "Let's move." They returned to the base as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the pale glow casting long shadows through the ruins. Talia worked furiously, her fingers flying over the console as she pieced together the makeshift transmitter. Callan watched in silence, the tension in the room palpable. "Got it," Talia said finally, her voice laced with exhaustion but triumph. She gestured to the crude device now humming softly on the table. "It's not pretty, but it should work. Once we're in range of their fleet, I can trigger the signal." Callan nodded. "Then let's finish this." The final approach to the Xa'Lorne fleet was a calculated risk. Using the ruins as cover, the team moved with surgical precision, their movements silent and deliberate. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and charred metal, the distant hum of the alien ships growing louder with each step. They reached the edge of the extraction field, where the largest Xa'Lorne vessel hovered ominously, its tendrils writhing like serpents in the air. Callan's heart pounded as he gestured for Talia to set up the transmitter. "Cover her," he ordered, his voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside him. Erix and Issa took positions on either side, their rifles trained on the ship above. Talia worked quickly, her hands steady as she calibrated the device. The faint hum grew louder, building to a crescendo that seemed to vibrate through the ground beneath them. "Signals live," Talia said, stepping back. Her voice was barely audible over the growing hum. "Now we wait." The effect was immediate. The Xa'Lorne ship shuddered violently, its glowing veins flickering erratically. The tendrils curled inward, their movements spasmodic and uncontrolled. A low, guttural hum resonated through the air, followed by a deafening explosion, as the ship's core collapsed in on itself. "Chain reaction," Talia said, her voice filled with awe and terror as the other ships began to falter, their systems succumbing to the signal. "It's working." Callan watched as the fleet above tore itself apart, the once mighty vessels reduced to fire and ash. The victory was brutal, final, and it left him with a hollow feeling he couldn't shake. "Is it over?" Issa asked, her voice breaking the silence. Callan stared at the wreckage, his jaw tightening. "For now." The smoke hadn't yet cleared from the ruins of New Anchorage, but the alien fleet was gone. The Xa'Lorne ships that hadn't succumbed to the signal had fled, retreating into the cold void of space with the desperation of a wounded predator. Callan Dray stood in the midst of the aftermath, his rifle slung across his back, watching as the fires in the distance licked the horizon. The acrid smell of burnt metal and scorched earth clung to the air, mixing with the faint tang of ozone that always followed destruction. "It's over," Issa said softly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. She stood beside him, her rifle resting against her shoulder, her eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting another attack. "They're gone." "For now," Callan replied, his voice flat. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the remnants of the alien extraction fields, their twisted, organic forms crumpled like the skeletons of great beasts. The victory felt hollow, weighed down by the knowledge of what had truly transpired. Behind them, Talia emerged from the rubble, her face pale and drawn but resolute. The makeshift transmitter hung from her shoulder, its components charred from overuse. "The signal's burned out," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "We won't be using it again." "Good," Callan said, finally turning to face her. One was enough. Erix approached, his boots crunching softly against the rubble. His usually stoic expression was unreadable, his dark eyes flicking between Callan and Talia. "And now the galaxy knows. That wasn't just a win, it was a message. They'll see us as a threat." "Let them," Callan said sharply, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "It's better than being seen as prey." Erix's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Callan turned away, the weight of his team's stares pressing against his back. The truth was he wasn't sure he believed his own words. The signal had worked, and the Xa'Lorne were gone. But at what cost? The bacteria that had spread through their forces had been an accident, a cruel twist of biology that humanity had stumbled upon out of desperation. And now it was their legacy, a legacy of fear. "Talia," Callan said, his voice softer now, "how long before the Galactic Council finds out?" "They already know," she replied, her tone grim. "I intercepted their signals during the mission. They've been monitoring the Xa'Lorne collapse, and they're not happy. We've been labeled as a Class Omega threat, a biological anomaly capable of planetary extinction." Issa let out a low whistle. "Guess that's one way to make an impression." Callan didn't respond. He glanced at the horizon where the faint glimmer of stars was just visible through the dissipating smoke. The weight of the galaxy's gaze felt heavier than ever, pressing down on him like a physical force. "What now?" Erix asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Callan straightened, his gaze hardening. "We prepare. If they come, we show them we're not afraid. And if they want answers, We give them, on our terms. 3 days later, the Council's emissaries arrived. The alien ship was unlike anything Callan had ever seen, sleek and metallic, its surface rippling with light like liquid silver. It hovered above the ruins of Earth's capital, a silent monolith against the charred skyline. Callan stood at the base of the landing zone, flanked by his team. The air was sharp and cold, the wind biting against his skin. The emissaries descended in a beam of light, their forms humanoid but distinctly alien. Their elongated limbs and shimmering skin gave them an otherworldly elegance, their movements unnervingly smooth. Their leader, a being who introduced itself as Counselor Velas, regarded Callan with piercing silver eyes. "Sergeant Callan Dray," Velas said, its voice resonating with an unnatural cadence. "You are the representative of humanity in this incident." Callan didn't flinch under the counselor's gaze. "I represent those who fought to survive." Velas's expression didn't change. "Your actions have drawn the attention of the galaxy. The use of your biological anomaly has raised concerns. The Xa'Lorne's collapse has destabilized entire sectors." "We didn't ask for this," Callan said firmly. "They came to our planet. They attacked us. What happened to them was a consequence of their own arrogance." "Your bacteria," Velas said, its tone sharp, "is a weapon that could annihilate entire species. The Council cannot ignore this." Callan stepped forward, his voice steady but edged with steel. "It's not a weapon. It's who we are. We didn't create it, and we didn't deploy it on purpose, but when the Xa'Lorne gave us no choice, we fought back with what we had, and we survived." The counselor regarded him in silence, its silver eyes unreadable. Behind Callan, Talia and Eric stood tense, their hands hovering near their weapons. The weight of the moment was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken tension. "We are not monsters," Callan continued, his voice rising. "We are survivors. You've ignored us, dismissed us as insignificant, left us to fend for ourselves. And now that we've proven we're capable of standing up for ourselves, you call us a threat?" Velas tilted its head, its expression shifting slightly. "You misunderstand, Sergeant. The Council does not fear what you have done. It fears what you could become." Callan's jaw tightened. "What we become is up to us, but we won't be dictated to. If the Council wants peace, it starts by treating us as equals, not anomalies." The silence that followed was deafening, the tension so thick it felt like a tangible force. Finally, Velas spoke, its tone measured. "Your defiance is noted. The Council will deliberate on humanity's status. In the meantime, Earth will remain under observation. Do not give us a reason to see you as more than survivors." The emissaries disappeared in the same beam of light, leaving the team standing in the cold, empty silence. Callan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "They're scared," Issa said, her voice quiet but laced with satisfaction. "Good," Callan replied. "Let them be." That night, Callan stood on a ridge overlooking the ruins of New Anchorage. The stars stretched endlessly above him, a vast, glittering expanse that felt both beautiful and oppressive. He could feel the weight of the galaxy's eyes, watching, waiting, judging. "We did it," Talia said, approaching him quietly. She stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We survived." "For now," Callan said, his voice low. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "But survival's not enough. Not anymore." "What happens next?" she asked. Callan turned back to the stars, his jaw set with quiet determination. "We build, we prepare, and we make sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when they underestimate humanity." The wind swept across the ridge, carrying the faint scent of ash and renewal. For the first time in months, Callan felt the faint stirrings of hope. Earth had been scarred, battered, and broken, but it wasn't beaten. And neither was he. "Your bacteria," Velas said, its tone sharp, "is a weapon that could annihilate entire species. The Council cannot ignore this. Callan stepped forward, his voice steady but edged with steel. It's not a weapon. It's who we are. We didn't create it, and we didn't deploy it on purpose, but when the Xa'Lorne gave us no choice, we fought back with what we had, and we survived. The counselor regarded him in silence, its silver eyes unreadable. Behind Callan, Talia and Eric stood tense, their hands hovering near their weapons. The weight of the moment was suffocating, the air thick with unspoken tension. "We are not monsters," Callan continued, his voice rising. "We are survivors. You've ignored us, dismissed us as insignificant, left us to fend for ourselves. And now that we've proven we're capable of standing up for ourselves, you call us a threat?" Velas tilted its head, its expression shifting slightly. "You misunderstand, Sergeant. The Council does not fear what you have done. It fears what you could become." Callan's jaw tightened. "What we become is up to us, but we won't be dictated to. If the Council wants peace, it starts by treating us as equals, not anomalies." The silence that followed was deafening, the tension so thick it felt like a tangible force. Finally, Velas spoke, its tone measured. "Your defiance is noted. The Council will deliberate on humanity's status. In the meantime, Earth will remain under observation. Do not give us a reason to see you as more than survivors." The emissaries disappeared in the same beam of light, leaving the team standing in the cold, empty silence. Callan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "They're scared," Issa said, her voice quiet but laced with satisfaction. "Good," Callan replied. "Let them be." That night, Callan stood on a ridge overlooking the ruins of New Anchorage. The stars stretched endlessly above him, a vast, glittering expanse that felt both beautiful and oppressive. He could feel the weight of the galaxy's eyes, watching, waiting, judging. "We did it," Talia said, approaching him quietly. She stopped beside him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "We survived." "For now," Callan said, his voice low. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "But survival's not enough. Not anymore." "What happens next?" she asked. Callan turned back to the stars, his jaw set with quiet determination. "We build, we prepare, and we make sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when they underestimate humanity." The wind swept across the ridge, carrying the faint scent of ash and renewal. For the first time in months, Callan felt the faint stirrings of hope. Earth had been scarred, battered, and broken, but it wasn't beaten. And neither was he.